I was 3 sips into my morning coffee when I heard the sound that changed everything. Tires crunching across my lawn. Not the driveway, not the sidewalk, my lawn. And there, like a scene from a bad sitcom, sat a silver SUV, parked right on top of my wife's rose bushes. That was the moment I realized retirement wasn't going to be peaceful. It was going to be a battlefield. And I wasn't about to lose a war over grass. It started on a Tuesday, one of those crisp, early spring mornings where the dew still clings to the grass, and the air smells faintly of coffee, lilac, and retirement dreams finally coming true. I had just settled into my favorite rocking chair on the porch, the same one Martha and I found at an antique store back in '91 when I heard it, that god-awful crunch. Tires on gravel, but not my gravel driveway, my lawn. The one I'd poured heart, soul, and more back surgeries into perfecting. A sound that every homeowner knows and dreads. That sound where you don't even need to look because your gut's already twisting. And sure enough, I turned my head and there it was. A silver Lexus SUV, gleaming polished, like it just rolled off a dealership lot. Parked, right there, on my front lawn. Now, look, I'm not a man to jump to conclusions. 40 years in the service taught me how to stay calm when things get dicey. I've dealt with landmines, interrogations, and 3 sons under one roof during puberty. But something about this, it got under my skin in a way I hadn't felt in years. I stepped off the porch, barefoot, bathrobe tied up, and approached the vehicle. The driver's door popped open, and out stepped a woman. Mid-50s, overly crisp bob haircut, wearing a floral scarf that screamed, "I shop exclusively at stores with monograms." She looked at me like I was the one trespassing. Before I could say a word, she held up her keys like a badge and chirped, "Morning." Just a quick stop. HOA business. Then she clicked her door shut and strode down the sidewalk like she owned the block. Never mind that she had just parked on someone else's property. I stood there, dumbfounded, watching her disappear around the corner. That was the first time I met Karen, the woman who had turned my golden years into a petty, passive-aggressive suburban war zone. The next morning, I assumed it was a fluke. Maybe she was lost or in a hurry. People make mistakes. But then, 6:55 a.m., just like clockwork, I heard it again. That unmistakable crunch, and there it was. Same Lexus, same driver, same spot, and this time, a note tucked under the windshield wiper, printed on pastel pink stationery, scented like sadness and lavender. It read, "You should be honored to help your neighbors." K. Pinned beneath that note was something even more galling, an expired HOA permit from 3 years ago, as if that gave her diplomatic immunity from decency. Now, to understand why this struck such a nerve, you need to know a few things. That lawn, it wasn't just grass. It was therapy. After 2 knee replacements, 3 grandkids, and 1 major heart scare, tending to that lawn became my ritual, my church, my little green slice of control in a world where everything else moves too fast. I had grown that lawn from scratch, 1 seed, 1 weekend, 1 pulled muscle at a time. And she just rolled over it, like it was nothing. That Friday I caught her in the act. I waited on the porch, mug in hand, watching like a hawk with caffeine. As she swung open her car door and reached into the back seat for a bag, I called out, "Ma'am, you're on private property." Again. She barely looked up. "Sweetie," she said with a smirk, "if it's outside your door, it's common property." She added air quotes around common property, like they gave her a free pass to violate basic manners. Now I've been called a lot of things in my day, son, sergeant, husband, father, but never sweetie by someone running over my petunias. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already walking away, heels clicking down the pavement like a judge's gavel dismissing a case before the trial. Over the weekend, Martha and I tried to let it go. She even baked banana bread for the church bake sale, and I convinced myself this was just a phase. But come Monday morning, the SUV was back. Only this time it wasn't alone. It brought mud. Thick, splattered, clinging mud that caked our lawn in brown patches like fungal rot. She had driven through someone else's sprinkler runoff, or maybe a construction site, and carried that mess right into our sanctuary. And the HOA? Oh, the HOA. When I called to report it, the woman on the line practically sighed. Oh, Karen. Like it was just another Tuesday. Turns out, Karen wasn't just any resident. She was the self-appointed Community Harmony Liaison, a title she created, printed business cards for, and used to bully half the neighborhood into her strange little order. She wasn't on the board. She had invented her position. And somehow, a few tired board members humored her. They said she brought energy. Let me tell you something. A rabid skunk brings energy, too. Doesn't mean you invite it to run your garden club. It didn't stop there. By the second week, she wasn't just parking. She was using our lawn as a shortcut. That's right, cutting across it like some private scenic route, leaving deep tire tracks like scars, brown and jagged, chewing through the green. Martha's tulips gone, just flattened under a layer of will tread and arrogance. One morning, we watched in stunned silence as she blasted her way through a patch of forget-me-nots. Martha gasped. I swear one of the neighborhood kids said it best when he muttered, "Is she drunk driving through a flower shop?" But it wasn't until I saw the birds that it really hit me. A pair of little robins, nesting near our porch, had landed near one of her new tire paths. They struggled to hop across, sinking slightly into the gouged mud tracks like a trench. That's when I realized this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect, not just for land, but for boundaries, for community, for people. And you know what really stung? Karen had the audacity to post on the neighborhood Facebook group. She ranted about selfish homeowners who hoard their yards like tyrants and included a vague jab at people who think their lawn matters more than the community. It got 3 likes, one from a profile named Karen Fan USA, and 2 that were clearly burner accounts. One of them was literally KLove69. I couldn't make this up if I tried, but I wasn't laughing. Martha was heartbroken. She stopped planting new bulbs, said, "Why bother?" And that broke me more than anything Karen had driven over. So I took one last shot. I walked to her door, knocked, politely asked if we could talk. She opened the door, phone in hand, recorded me before I said a word, and yelled, "I'm being harassed," before slamming the door. That video, she posted it online with the caption, "Veteran attacks woman over parking spot." It got 2 views. One was me. That's when I knew. Karen didn't want peace. She wanted control. And the HOA? Spineless. No one wanted to get involved. So I made a decision, right then and there, standing on the edge of the battlefield that used to be my front yard. I whispered something that would change everything. All right then, let's dance. Because you see, in this life, there's a moment, especially when you're older, when you stop caring about being nice and start caring about being right. You stop letting people step on you. You stop letting people step on you. You stop making excuses for bullies with good hair and bad manners. And if no one else is going to stand up for the lawn, for the birds, for your wife's rose bushes, you do it yourself. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I just called Glenn. Still got that old drainage equipment. He chuckled. Oh boy, what did she do now? And as we started sketching out plans, reviewing water tables, and digging through storage bins marked DIY disaster recovery, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The kind that comes with protecting something worth defending. Because Karen may have parked on my lawn, but what she didn't know was she had just activated something far older, far stronger, and far more relentless than HOA bylaws. A man with time, tools, and nothing left to lose. It's funny how fast you can go from lawn care hobbyist to full-blown suburban tactician when pushed hard enough. And make no mistake, by week 3 of Karen's daily invasions, I wasn't just pushed. I was steamrolled, not just by tires, but by lies, HOA apathy, and that unique flavor of arrogance only found in someone who thinks scented candles and Facebook groups qualify them for leadership. Glenn arrived that Saturday morning, 2 thermoses of black coffee in one hand and a dusty blue binder in the other, labeled Hurricane Mitigation Plans, Gulf Coast 04. I raised an eyebrow. He just grinned. "We're not making a mess," he said. "We're just doing aggressive landscaping." I nodded, and just like that, Operation Swamp Trap was born. The first rule of revenge when you're over 60? Always make sure it's legal. You don't survive decades of marriage, mortgages, and municipal red tape without knowing how to stay 3 steps ahead of trouble. So we started subtle. We reviewed the property survey. Oh yes, I still had the original from 1983, framed in plastic and laminated against termites and tyranny. That document proved what I already knew. The lawn was mine, all of it. No easement, no community use. Nothing but green grass and personal pride. But more than that, it gave us measurements. Precision. And for what we were about to do, precision was key. We marked off the section most commonly used by Karen's SUV. Roughly a 10 by 15 foot rectangle at the front edge of the yard, right by the tulip bed she destroyed. Then we rented a sod cutter from the local hardware store. Not the kind you'd use for a Saturday hobby. No, this one was built like a tank, loud, gas-powered, and heavy enough to tilt a wheelbarrow. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. One kid actually brought out a folding chair and whispered into a walkie-talkie. I gave him a thumbs up. He nearly fainted with excitement, and so we began peeling back the lawn. Strip by strip, the healthy green blades rolled up like a carpet being evicted from a ballroom. It felt strangely satisfying, like finally pulling the bandage off a wound that had been festering too long. By midday, we were standing on a square of bare earth that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Rich, dark soil, vulnerable, exposed, and ready to be transformed. Glenn and I took a lunch break around 1 p.m., splitting a bag of jerky and sipping warm lemonade as we looked at the exposed dirt like a pair of artists admiring a blank canvas. But this wasn't art. This was strategy. Hydrology, Glenn muttered, tapping the binder. It's all about water flow. You want soft edges, deceptive drainage. We don't want to flood the whole yard, just her favorite parking zone. We unspooled 2 industrial hoses, stretching them from the outdoor spigot toward the bare patch. We started filling, slowly, carefully, layer by layer. The earth softened beneath the weight of controlled moisture. Now you might be wondering, what about Martha? Well, let me tell you something about my wife. You don't survive 43 years of marriage without developing instincts. When she stepped out onto the porch and saw what we were doing, she didn't say a word. She just tilted her head, blinked, and said, "You boys need sandwiches." That woman, God bless her, made 2 turkey clubs and added lemonade ice cubes to our drinks without asking a single question. She knew. She knew. By late afternoon, the lawn had become a low-level bog. Nothing dangerous, nothing permanent, but just unstable enough to swallow a car tire if one happened to roll over it too quickly. To reinforce the illusion of innocence, we placed 4 tasteful garden signs around the perimeter. Caution. Fresh lawn treatment. Do not disturb. Authorized access only. Soil rehabilitation in progress. Please help the grass heal. No parking zone. And my favorite, protected wildlife zone. Nesting birds and natural drainage area. Karen could ignore social cues. She could ignore fences, but you know what she couldn't ignore? A laminated sign. Sunday evening, the stage was set. The sun dipped behind the pines, casting long shadows across the glistening earth. The air smelled faintly of cedar mulch, determination and poetic justice. And right then, as I stood on the porch, sipping my 3rd cup of decaf and watching a squirrel hesitate at the swamp's edge, I smiled to myself. Because I wasn't just getting even. I was restoring balance. Monday morning, 6:55 a.m. sharp. Crunch. I didn't move. 6:56, engine rumble. Tires spin. 6:57, the familiar sound of self-importance clattering against logic. And then, 6:58 a.m., the grand finale. Squelch. It was glorious, the kind of sound that lives in your bones. A low, wet gulping noise as her front tires sank into the sodden earth. A panicked rev of the engine. Another gulp. Splashes. Muffled shouting. I stood behind the blinds, like a birdwatcher, marveling at nature in action. Karen was trapped. The mighty Lexus rendered useless, its glossy finish now decorated with flying chunks of mud and garden debris. And then she did the thing I was waiting for. She stepped out, and the earth claimed her. Her heel disappeared instantly. She shrieked, a high, piercing sound that echoed down the block. Her foot wrenched free with a sucking sound so loud it startled a dog 3 houses down. She stumbled backward, slipped, and landed flat on her backside, right in the middle of the swamp. Glenn called it an accidental baptism of consequences. By now, neighbors were gathering. Janice from across the street pretended to walk her dog, who hadn't moved in 15 minutes. Tom jogged by twice in jeans. Even old man Crenshaw, who hadn't spoken to anyone since 2009, appeared on his porch with a bowl of popcorn. Karen, covered in mud, flailed like a cat in a bathtub. She pointed at me, accusingly, screaming about sabotage, lawsuits, toxic waste, and bird endangerment. I stepped outside, slowly, coffee in hand. "Morning, Karen," I said cheerfully. She jabbed a muddy finger at me. "You'll pay for this." I smiled and pointed to the laminated HOA parking guidelines I had pinned to the tree. She squinted. "No parking on grass, landscape surfaces, or non-designated zones," I read aloud. She stammered, floundered, then slipped again. A few neighbors gasped. Someone might have giggled. "Have a nice day," I said, then turned and walked back inside. The trap had worked, but this wasn't the end. Oh no. Karen wasn't the type to take a loss quietly. The swamp was only phase 1, because once Karen realized brute force wouldn't work, she did what all tyrants do when their power is threatened. She called for reinforcements. The next day, a man showed up in a reflective vest with a clipboard and a badge that looked suspiciously like it came from a Halloween costume bin. He claimed to be a municipal boundary advisor, here to conduct an emergency land reassessment. On a Tuesday? I asked. "Yes," he said, reading from a note clearly written in Sharpie. "By order of, the community board special liaison." You guessed it, Karen. I offered to walk him to the area in question. He nodded, then promptly lost his left boot in the swamp. He never came back, but Karen wasn't done. Over the next week, we got 3 more visitors. One held a selfie stick and claimed it was a property scanner. Another wore a suit 3 sizes too big and introduced himself as legal technicalities supervisor. The third just looked around, muttered, "Yep, looks about right," and left. It was a clown parade of delusion, and it was time to bring in the cavalry. I called an emergency neighborhood meeting, not at the HOA clubhouse at our home, on the porch. Cookies out, lemonade chilled, chairs set in a semicircle like a suburban tribunal. We weren't just dealing with a nuisance anymore. This was a campaign of chaos, and it needed a coordinated response. I passed around the documents, photos, dates, HOA bylaws, property survey maps. Martha handed out cookies and nodded solemnly as I laid out the timeline. Glenn ran the slideshow from his laptop, complete with dramatic music. Karen's behavior, her lies, her escalating tactics, her fake officials, her destruction of property, her online rants. It was all there. By the end, everyone was silent. Then Janine, the HOA treasurer, stood up. "Let's fix this," she said. And just like that, we had a plan. When a woman like Karen gets stuck in the mud, literally and figuratively, you'd think she'd step back, dry off, and rethink her life choices. But not Karen. No, she didn't retreat after the swamp incident. She regrouped. And instead of changing her behavior, she escalated it again. 3 days after the great sinking of the Lexus, Martha and I came home from the grocery store to find an envelope duct-taped to our front door. Not tucked under the mat, not slid through the mail slot, duct-taped. Red tape, too, the kind that screams passive aggression from 50 feet. Inside was a letter, typed in all caps, signed in loopy cursive that I recognized from the flamingo pink Facebook rants. It claimed I had deliberately defaced communal land, that I had created a hostile swamp environment, and that I would be hearing from her attorney. Now, let's be clear. Karen's version of an attorney was her cousin Todd, a man whose legal experience consisted entirely of being kicked out of community college during a mock trial. But the letter? It was full of big words like malfeasance, environmental aggression, and even vehicular endangerment. She clearly used a thesaurus, probably right after watching a late-night rerun of Law and Order. I should have laughed, but after weeks of tire tracks, trespassing, and tulip tragedies, I was done laughing. So I got to work. I pulled out the same binder Glenn and I had used during Operation Swamp Trap and gave it a makeover. Tabs, labels, divider sheets. It grew from a small folder into a 3-ring war chest. Exhibit A, security footage from the birdhouse camera. Karen's SUV turning into my yard, not once, not twice, but 17 times. Exhibit B, photos of tire tracks, mud splashes, flattened rose bushes, and my cracked irrigation pipe. Exhibit C, screenshots of Karen's Facebook rants, including the one where she said, "Some people think they own grass. I own the truth." Exhibit D, a copy of the actual HOA bylaws, not the fake ones she printed at home, the real ones, with highlighted clauses proving beyond any shadow of doubt that my lawn was mine, that parking on landscape property was banned, and that the board had zero tolerance for repeated violations. And just to be thorough, I included one more tab, Community Voices. Because what Karen didn't realize was that she hadn't just messed with me, she had a track record. It started with Mr. Rodriguez, 2 doors down. He came by while I was pressure washing the last of the mud off my driveway. He'd seen Karen stomp through his rose bushes once and confront his teenage grandson for playing music too loudly at 4 p.m. Then came Mrs. Lee, our sweet 76-year-old neighbor, who wore cardigans year-round and baked snickerdoodles that could end wars. She told me Karen had once unplugged her Christmas lights because they were too pedestrian and clashed with the community aesthetic. Then the Anderson kids. God bless them, they made a whole video compilation of Karen yelling at them through the fence. Every clip was time-stamped. One had a zoom effect and slow motion. They even added sad violin music. Before I knew it, I had statements from 11 different residents, all signed, all dated, all describing years of Karen's absurdities, from moving other people's trash bins to filing complaints about unpatriotic flag angles. It wasn't a binder anymore. It was a dossier. Now, I'm a believer in peaceful resolutions. I've seen enough violence in my day, but I also believe in standing your ground, with paperwork, with principle, and when necessary, with strategic humiliation. So I submitted everything to the HOA board under the clause Martha, and I found buried on page 14 of the bylaws. Any member may request an emergency disciplinary hearing with 10 or more neighbor endorsements. I submitted 37, and just like that, the gears of justice began to grind. The night of the emergency HOA meeting was one for the books. We met in the community clubhouse, plastic chairs lined in rows, folding tables pushed to the side, and a plate of dry cookies someone had clearly stolen from a bake sale fundraiser. But the atmosphere? Electric. People showed up early, dressed nice, serious faces. It felt like a trial, and in a way it was. I came with my binder. Glenn came with a flash drive and a Bluetooth speaker. Martha wore her Bless This Mess sweatshirt with quiet defiance. And Karen? Oh, she showed up late, wearing a pantsuit 2 sizes too small, a smile that could curdle milk, and dragging behind her Todd. Yes, cousin Todd, her lawyer. in a suit jacket with a sales tag still hanging from the back. He carried a folder labeled legal stuff and looked like he was about to cry. Mrs. Feldman, the HOA president, God bless that woman and her iron will, called the meeting to order by banging her travel mug on the table. Tonight's issue, she said, unauthorized parking, property damage, and false legal claims filed by one Karen Whitmore against multiple residents. Karen immediately raised her hand. I'd like to begin with a statement. Mrs. Feldman paused. You'll have time, but first, the floor goes to Mr. Thompson. That's me. And oh, did I deliver? I handed out glossy photo packets to everyone in the room. I played the birdhouse footage on the projector. Slow motion, date stamped, zoomed in on her license plate. Glenn even added a dramatic piano score. One neighbor actually gasped. Then I handed out the HOA bylaws, the real ones, with all the relevant sections highlighted. And then, just for flavor, I played the Anderson kids video. The moment Karen yelled at them for breathing too loudly, followed by her storming off muttering about feral Gen Z energy, had the whole room chuckling. But the final blow? Janine, the HOA treasurer and my new favorite person on earth, stood up and presented her folder. She had gone through 3 years of HOA minutes and highlighted every bogus complaint Karen had filed. There were 74 complaints about flags, dogs, sidewalk chalk, hummingbird feeders, and one guy who left his Christmas wreath up in January. That was me. It was a nice wreath. Karen tried to interrupt, of course. This is all being taken out of context, she shouted. Todd stood up and stammered, We plead the fifth. Mrs. Feldman blinked. This isn't a criminal trial. Well, then we object. To what? To the way the lights are making me sweat. The silence was deafening. Then came the motion. Official fines. $500 for property damage. $200 for unauthorized parking. $300 in HOA penalties. But the real punishment? Karen was stripped of her self-appointed community role, her flyers, her titles, her pretend authority. The HOA voted unanimously. Even Old Man Jenkins, who once filed a motion to ban Halloween as witchcraft propaganda, gave me a thumbs up. Karen burst into tears, screamed something about small-minded traitors, stormed out. Todd followed, still holding his legal stuff, folder upside down. And the room erupted, not in cheers, but in slow, relieved applause. But I wasn't done. Not yet. 2 days later, a new twist arrived on our front door. A city citation. 5 violations. All laughably fake. Excessive lawn saturation. Unauthorized wildlife conservation zone. Decorative surveillance. No, not up to code. Improper sidewalk drainage risking migratory bird routes. And my favorite, potential harboring of invasive swamp species. I stood there blinking, then looked across the street, and there she was, Karen, in a lawn chair, wearing sunglasses, sipping from a wine glass full of Diet Coke, smirking like a Bond villain. She'd filed every complaint herself, weaponized bureaucracy, called the city, fabricated hazard reports, all because she couldn't handle defeat. But what Karen didn't know, what she never saw coming, was that I was ready for this too. Because when you've served your country, raised a family, built a home, and defended your front lawn from tire tracks, you learn one simple truth. The best revenge isn't petty. It's prepared. And in my hands, I held a binder thick with truth. And a neighborhood ready to fight with me 3 weeks after the HOA hearing, after the fines, after the binder, after the binders, binder got a binder. You'd think the story would be over. A lesser person, someone reasonable, might have learned their lesson, maybe issued an apology, or at the very least, backed away slowly and stopped terrorizing the hydrangeas. But Karen? No. Karen decided to go out swinging. It began with the pool incident. It was a warm Saturday, and the neighborhood was hosting its first spring community pool party in nearly 5 years. Potlucks, lemonade stands, picnic tables with plastic gingham cloths. It was like a Norman Rockwell painting in flip-flops. Martha had baked her famous pecan pie. I wore my Hawaiian shirt. Everything was perfect until Karen showed up. Now remember, she was officially banned from all HOA events following her disciplinary hearing. She had no business being there. But that didn't stop her from strutting through the gate, oversized sun hat flopping, wearing heels and holding a glass pitcher of spa water, infused with cucumber and vengeance. The music stopped. Conversations died. Karen marched up to the table and began handing out flyers. Yes, more flyers titled, "The Truth About My Lawn Accuser." In them, she blamed me for everything from intentional community sabotage to using swamp water to launder resentment. No, seriously, that was a real quote. But before she could finish her circuit, Mrs. Feldman appeared like a suburban specter in white capri pants and a clipboard. "Karen," she said firmly, "you are trespassing. Please leave." Karen tried to stall, claimed it was a misunderstanding of bylaws, and that her cousin Todd was appealing to the HOA judiciary branch. "We don't have one." That's when the sheriff's deputy, quietly sipping sweet tea in the corner, his daughter lives in the neighborhood, walked over. "Ma'am," he said, polite but firm, "I'm going to have to escort you out." Karen threw a fit, spilled her spa water, kicked a beach ball into the potato salad, screamed about constitutional rights and lawn abuse. They walked her out anyway. But if you thought that was the end, buckle up. Because Karen had one last move, one desperate, outrageous play to reclaim her perceived authority. She listed our home for sale. Yes, our home, without our permission. We first found out when a confused couple rang our doorbell asking for a tour. "Excuse me," the man said, "is this the 3-bed, 2-bath craftsman with natural landscaping and recent plumbing upgrades?" I blinked. "This is a 2-bed ranch with war scars and a flooded garden bed. Who told you that?" He held up his phone. There it was. A real estate listing, our address, fake photos, doctored images showing a pristine lawn and brand new windows. And listed under the seller? Karen W. I nearly dropped my coffee. Now, at this point, I'd seen a lot of things. But pretending to own and sell someone else's house? That's a new level of bonkers. So I called the police. Again. They came fast. Turns out this wasn't Karen's first rodeo. She had previously listed the HOA clubhouse as a well-lit minimalist condo opportunity for singles and retirees. That case was dropped when the buyer found 200 folding chairs and a rogue raccoon in the utility closet. But this time, she crossed a legal line. Fraud, misrepresentation, attempted theft by deception, and you better believe I pressed charges. The court date came 2 weeks later. Martha and I wore our Sunday best. Karen came in looking like she got dressed in a Hallmark clearance bin, and Todd, he didn't show. Turns out he was arrested the day before for impersonating a notary at a flea market in Alabama. The judge, an older gentleman with no tolerance for nonsense, read through the paperwork, looked at the screenshots, the property deed, the video of Karen yelling at squirrels in our flower bed, which the defense tried to label as meditative therapy, and simply sighed. He ruled in under 10 minutes. Karen was fined $5,000 for fraud and misrepresentation, ordered to attend mandatory community service, and banned from initiating any further real estate actions without court approval. And then sweet, sweet justice, he added. Ms. Whitmore is to cease and desist from any contact, visual interference, or vehicular approach within 50 feet of the Thompson lawn, a 50-foot no-go zone. Karen was officially legally banned from looking at our grass. After court, things changed. Fast. Word spread through the neighborhood. Karen became a pariah. Invitations dried up. Her only Facebook comment in 2 weeks was a rant about grass fascism that no one liked. Not even her own mother. Then, one quiet Wednesday, her husband, yes, the rarely seen, long-suffering Mr. Whitmore, loaded up a truck, packed the dog, and left. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. That was the final blow. Karen's empire had crumbled. And just like that, the house went up for sale. For real this time. But not before the community got in one last jab. The day before her open house, someone, no one knows who, placed a custom sign on the lawn. Tastefully done. Professional lettering. Caution. Former owner prone to delusions of authority. Drive slowly and avoid swamps. Even the realtor laughed. No buyers came. By summer's end, the house finally sold, at a loss, to a young couple with a golden retriever and a dream of raising a family in a quiet, peaceful community. The kicker? The husband? A city code enforcement officer. You could not write a better epilogue. On moving day, I walked over with a plate of cookies and a folded copy of the HOA bylaws. He smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Don't worry, sir. I'm very familiar with parking violations." We both laughed, and as he looked around the neighborhood, he added, "This is going to be a quiet place, right?" I glanced across the street where Karen's rose bush was slowly withering under a tarp of forgotten spite and whispered, "It is now." That fall, I reseeded the lawn. Martha planted new roses. Glenn helped me build a small garden bed around the old swamp zone. And right in the middle of it, we placed a small wooden sign, hand-painted, one word, respect. No more tire tracks. No more notes. No more fake lawyers or homemade bylaws. Just peace and the quiet rustle of well-earned justice in the wind.